Henry VIII had a fairly convoluted dating history, which is no secret. His wives have retained the heritage of the Tudor king's lineage, appearing in everything from a nursery song to their own Broadway musical. The history of Anne Boleyn, who was possibly one of his most contentious spouses, is still the subject of heated discussion. Despite the passage of time, Anne continues to be the antagonist of the illustrious Tudor family in this tale of desire, love, scandal, and murder. After being found responsible for numerous offenses against her husband, Anne was executed at the Tower of London on May 19, 1536. But what really led to the execution of Queen Anne Boleyn? Long before she was put to death, Anne's reputation began to grow. The primary finger of blame for Henry's declaration of secession from the Vatican and his wife Catherine was pointed at Anne. In actuality, he left the Catholic Church out of more of a sense of duty than lust. Henry believed that his marriage to Catherine of Aragon was the cause of his inability to sire a male successor, since he was desperate to have one inherit his realm. Henry believed that because Catherine had been previously married to his older brother Arthur, their union was invalid in the sight of God. To be able to wed Anne, who he thought would bear him a son and be his rightful heir, he petitioned the Vatican to formally dissolve his marriage to Catherine. In order to legitimize his marriage to Anne and make sure that any male offspring she produced could inherit the crown without dispute, Henry demanded the start of the English Reformation. After waiting for Henry's divorce for 7 long years, Anne and Henry finally got married in January 1533. Their union was marked by adoration and raging passion. Elizabeth, their daughter, would be born soon after their marriage. Sadly, a string of miscarriages, stillbirths, and heartbreak followed. Henry was severely hurt in a jousting mishap in January 1536, and he was very close to dying. He was thrown from his horse while wearing full armor, and the horse, which was also wearing full armor, collapsed on top of him, knocking him out for 2 hours. Many predicted that the accident would be fatal, and Anne miscarried as a result of the stress of losing her husband and king. She was pregnant Henry and Anne's long-desired son, who they had both longed for. Henry and Anne's relationship came to an end as a result of Henry's injury and possible brain damage, and less than 6 months after she was found guilty of 3 different crimes, she was put to death. So what crimes did Anne commit in those last few months that led to her being apprehended, imprisoned, and executed? 1. Adultery. Anne's alleged adultery with numerous different men of the Tudor court is the most well-known of her offenses. One of the accused was the Swedish singer Mark Smeaton. When he was eventually arrested in April, he admitted to having had sex with the Queen. Although it is thought that this confession was obtained by torture or psychological pressure, it was nonetheless taken seriously. Sir Henry Norris, the King's personal groom of the stool, Sir Francis Weston, and Sir William Brereton were all afterwards detained as a result of his confession. All were convicted despite maintaining their innocence throughout the proceedings. Thomas Boleyn, Anne's father, served on the jury that heard the case. Unfortunately, the Queen had revealed interactions and flirtations with numerous courtiers while she was detained in the Tower of London, which implicated her and the men in a more nefarious scheme. In a light-hearted exchange with Norris, Anne had hinted that, in the event of the king's demise, Norris would seek to replace him as Anne's husband. She didn't realize how much danger she was in and that every discussion was being relayed to her husband. Despite what was claimed to be a joke, Anne had just admitted to treason, a crime much more serious than adultery. 2. Conspiracy. Treason was one of the most dreaded offenses in the Tudor court. Henry's father succeeded to the Kingdom of England through conquest, not succession, having taken it during the War of the Roses. Henry was well aware that there might be greater claims to the throne because the years leading up to his rule had been turbulent. Any criticism of the throne was addressed with rapid punishment because there was a threat of additional conflict in the name of the throne. Treason was viewed as such a threat to the king that it included everything from planning an attack on the crown to casually bringing up his mortality or foretelling his demise. Henry now had evidence to accuse Anne of conspiring against the king thanks to the discussion's revelations. Henry now had the evidence to support his claim that he had been misled, eliminating any prior doubts he may have had about whether acting to have Anne executed was the correct course of action. 3. Incest and witchcraft. Despite having previously been given sufficient justification to kill his queen, the accusations against Anne only served to further denigrate and disgrace her. Her court adversaries wanted to make sure she left no legacy behind after her death, so having her executed wasn't enough. The rumor that Anne was a witch wasn't new. but her imprisonment and approaching trial fed rumors that she had employed witchcraft to gain admission to the court. Although Anne's charges did not include witchcraft, the long list of historical whisperings against the Queen helped to open the door for the final charge brought against her. Something so heinous that it would discredit her not only in the eyes of her husband, but in the eyes of God. The court delighted in stories of Anne's debauchery, from having an extra finger to the rumored deformities of stillborn children. A sin that cannot be forgiven. George Boleyn, Anne's brother, was the final man detained and charged with having an extramarital affair with her. George was hanged for conspiring against the monarch and for incest after a trial in which his own father served on the jury resulted in a guilty verdict. Other than the fact that they spent a lot of time together and were perceived as being close, there was no evidence offered to imply that Anne and George had maintained any sort of incestuous relationship. Thomas Boleyn, however, had sealed the fate of his daughter by finding his son guilty along with the other people who had been charged with adultery. The execution. Despite the lack of compelling evidence against her, Anne was put to death on May 19, 1536. 2 days after her brother and the other accused. In order to ensure a speedy execution, Henry changed Anne's sentence from burning to beheading and engaged a French swordsman known for his proficiency in capital punishment. Before bending down to take her punishment, Anne made a brief speech while standing on the scaffold. Before quickly mounting his horse and riding to Hampton Court for a tennis match, Henry waited on Tower Hill for the cannons to sound the death knell for Anne. He declared their marriage to be invalid and asked that all Anne-related paintings be taken down and destroyed, removing their daughter Elizabeth from the line of succession. This ensured that there was no doubt about the validity of the union when Henry married his third wife Jane Seymour 11 days later. It was taken like Anne Boleyn never even existed at all. Remember to like and subscribe to this channel, hit the bell button for easy notifications.